For 7 years, everyone believed Wilma Peterson had been born deaf. Her mother, Laura Peterson, the unyielding CEO of a multi-billion-dollar tech empire, spared no expense, flying in the finest specialists from Switzerland, Japan, Germany, and Israel to their home in Burbank, California. She poured fortunes into treatments, devices, and therapies, amounts that could sustain entire communities, all in a desperate bid to grant her daughter even the faintest whisper of sound. Yet, no matter the scans, the implants, or the endless evaluations, Wilma remained locked in a world of silence. Therapists labeled it neurological. Doctors deemed it congenital. Explanations abounded from every corner. All except from Wilma, who could offer none. But on one balmy California afternoon, everything shattered and reformed when a 7-year-old black girl, armed with nothing but her innate curiosity and kindness, spotted what the globe's elite experts had overlooked. Pauline Lambert, Wilma's gentle and perceptive classmate, paused on a sun-drenched sidewalk, brushed aside Wilma's hair, and peered at her ear with the fresh eyes of innocence. In under 2 minutes, she extracted something that prompted Wilma to gasp, the very first sound she had uttered with true awareness. Wilma had never been deaf at all. But what Pauline drew forth, that's where the shadows deepened. For it wasn't a mere glitch. It wasn't an element of the hearing aid. Someone had embedded it there deliberately. And when the truth surfaced about who was responsible, it ravaged every soul in that room. Before we go any further, let me just say, my beautiful family and friends, welcome back. If you're ready for another unforgettable story, do me a quick favor, hit that like button. Why? Because each like tells YouTube, this story is worth sharing with more people who might really need it today. Drop a comment below and let me know where you're watching from. I do read every single one, and it makes me feel like we're sitting together in the same room, sharing these moments heart to heart. And don't forget to share this video with someone you love. You never know, the story you share might be the encouragement they've been praying for. Most importantly, if you're new here, make sure to hit that subscribe button and turn on the notification bell. That way, you'll never miss a story when it drops. This isn't just a channel, it's a family. And when you engage, you're helping us build a safe space where real stories bring real hope. Now, let's begin. Let me take you back to where it all started. In the heart of Burbank's serene, tree-lined streets, where manicured lawns stretched under perpetual sunshine and the hum of distant traffic blended with birdsong, Wilma Peterson's world was one of profound quiet. From the moment she entered this life 7 years ago, silence had been her constant companion. Born to Laura Peterson, a woman whose name commanded boardrooms and whose innovations shaped the digital landscape, Wilma's arrival should have been a symphony of joy. Instead, it was marked by an inexplicable void. The doctors at the prestigious hospital where she was delivered ran initial tests, their faces creasing with concern as they detected no response to auditory stimuli. Congenital deafness, they pronounced, their voices carrying the weight of finality. Laura, still recovering from the birth, refused to accept it as defeat. She was a builder, a visionary who turned startups into empires. Surely, she could engineer a solution for her own flesh and blood. The early months blurred into a whirlwind of consultations. Specialists from across the globe were summoned to the Peterson sprawling estate, a modern marvel of glass and steel overlooking the hills. A renowned otologist from Switzerland arrived with cutting-edge implants, promising breakthroughs in neural connectivity. Japanese engineers brought prototypes of advanced hearing devices, sleek and embedded with AI to adapt to the user's needs. German audiologists conducted exhaustive mappings of Wilma's inner ear, charting every canal and nerve with precision instruments that cost more than luxury cars. From Israel came therapists specializing in pediatric sensory integration, their methods blending ancient holistic practices with modern science. Laura spared nothing. Millions flowed like water, funding research grants, custom therapies, and even a dedicated wing at a local clinic in Wilma's name. Yet, session after session, the results remained stubbornly unchanged. Wilma's small face, framed by soft curls, would tilt in confusion as sounds danced invisibly around her, forever out of reach. As Wilma grew from infant to toddler, the silence seeped deeper into her existence. She learned to navigate her world through sight and touch, her hands fluttering in rudimentary signs taught by patient instructors. But the pain lingered, a subtle, persistent ache around her ear where the hearing device was fitted. It was dismissed as adjustment discomfort, a side effect of the hardware pressing against delicate skin. Caregivers came and went, their initial enthusiasm waning into frustration. One nanny in particular, would snap her fingers impatiently, mouthing words Wilma couldn't grasp, her exasperation evident in furrowed brows and sharp gestures. "Try harder," the woman would sign half-heartedly, as if Wilma's inability was a choice. Laura, buried in conference calls and international travel, caught only glimpses of these interactions. She trusted the reports, the progress charts that showed incremental gains in nonverbal communication. In her mind, she was the devoted mother, providing every resource imaginable. But in the quiet corners of their home, Wilma's isolation grew, a silent storm brewing beneath the surface of their affluent life. School offered a glimmer of normalcy, though even there, Wilma moved like a shadow among her peers. At the upscale elementary in Burbank, where children of executives and creatives mingled, she sat on the fringes, observing the laughter and chatter she couldn't join. It was here that Pauline Lambert entered her orbit. Pauline, with her bright eyes and infectious warmth, came from a different world, a modest home where love outweighed luxury. Her parents, hard-working and grounded, had instilled in her a profound empathy, teaching her to notice the unspoken pains of others. From the first day, Pauline gravitated toward Wilma, drawn by an intuitive sense that something was amiss. She didn't pity her classmate. Instead, she engaged with genuine curiosity, using exaggerated expressions and simple drawings to bridge the gap. Wilma, for the first time, felt seen, not as a problem to fix, but as a friend. The fateful afternoon unfolded like any other in that idyllic suburb. The sun hung low, casting a golden haze over the sidewalks lined with blooming jacarandas. Wilma, in her favorite yellow dress that fluttered like a butterfly's wings, sat on the curb after school, rubbing her ear absent-mindedly. The ache had intensified that day, a throbbing she couldn't articulate. Pauline, walking beside her in a simple blue outfit, noticed the wince. She stopped, her young face etched with concern far beyond her years. Kneeling down, she gently lifted Wilma's hair, her fingers brushing the skin with care. What she saw puzzled her, a glint of something unnatural behind the hearing device, wedged deep and out of place. No adult had ever thought to look there. The experts had focused on internals, on scans and signals, never considering a physical obstruction so cleverly hidden. As Pauline's small hands worked delicately, the world around them seemed to hold its breath. A bird trilled from a nearby branch, a car engine rumbled in the distance, leaves rustled in the gentle breeze, sounds that would soon flood Wilma's senses. Across the street, Laura Peterson emerged from her home office, glancing out the window just in time to see the scene unfolding. Panic surged through her. What was this child doing to her daughter? She bolted out the door, her heels clicking sharply on the pavement as she sprinted toward them, her mind racing with fear and confusion. But she was too late. Pauline had already grasped the object, a thin, metallic shard hand-modified and etched with faint marks that spoke of deliberate intent. As it slid free, Wilma's eyes widened. The gasp escaped her lips, raw and instinctive, the first voluntary sound born of recognition. The sidewalk, once a place of quiet routine, transformed into the epicenter of revelation. And as Laura drew nearer, her heart pounding, the true darkness began to unfurl, the realization that this wasn't fate's cruel hand, but a human one, twisted by malice. This moment, frozen in time, marked the end of Wilma's silent prison and the beginning of a storm that would expose betrayals long buried. But to understand how it all led here, we must delve into the layers of Wilma's life before this day, the subtle cruelties, the overlooked signs, and the worlds of two families on the brink of collision. Long before that golden afternoon on the sidewalk, Wilma Peterson lived inside a beautiful cage. The house in Burbank rose like a glass palace on the hill, floor-to-ceiling windows, pale marble floors that stayed cool even in summer, and rooms so large that footsteps disappeared before they reached the next wall. To visitors, it looked like perfection. To 7-year-old Wilma, it felt like an endless, echoing quiet. She was a lovely child, skin like porcelain, blonde curls that caught the light, eyes the color of a winter sky. People often stopped Laura on the street to say how angelic her daughter looked. Laura would smile with exhausted pride, never noticing that Wilma's gaze rarely lifted from the ground. The silence had always owned her. From infancy, she wore the sleek, custom hearing devices that cost more than most cars. They curved behind her tiny ears like silver commas, promising connection and delivering none. Every morning a caregiver clicked them into place. Every evening another caregiver removed them for cleaning. In between, Wilma drifted through the day, unable to explain the ache that pulsed behind the left one. She would rub the spot, wince, point. Adults called it growing pains or phantom sensations. They gave her children's ibuprofen and moved on. The staff changed often. Laura paid top dollar, but patience was harder to buy. One nanny lasted 11 months, another only 6 weeks. They arrived smiling, left tight-lipped. Wilma learned early that her slowness irritated them. When she failed to turn at the clap of hands or took too long to follow assigned instruction, sighs sharpened into reprimands. Fingers snapped inches from her face. One caregiver, the one who stayed longest, developed a habit of gripping Wilma's chin, forcing eye contact, and mouthing slowly, "Try harder." 2. Listen. Wilma's eyes would fill, but no sound ever escaped to defend her. She simply shrank. Laura saw none of it. Her days began at 5 with international calls and ended long after midnight with investor decks. She flew to Seoul on Monday, London on Wednesday, returning with gifts Wilma could not hear unwrapped, musical snow globes, talking dolls, wind chimes that rang only for others. Laura believed the progress reports. She trusted the color-coded charts showing improvement in visual attention. She told herself the exhausted edge in the nanny's voices was normal. Raising a special needs child was hard on everyone. At night she sometimes stood in Wilma's doorway watching her daughter sleep, whispering, "I'm fixing this, baby. Mommy's almost there." Then the phone would buzz and the doorway would empty again. Across the same quiet suburb, in a modest 2-story house painted butter yellow, Pauline Lambert grew up in a different kind of noise. Her home smelled of cinnamon and laundry detergent, and every surface carried evidence of love. Crayon drawings taped to the refrigerator, framed school portraits crowding the hallway, the low hum of her parents' laughter while they cooked dinner together. Pauline's father came home with grease under his nails and stories on his tongue. Her mother came home with papers to grade and arms wide open. They taught their only daughter one unbreakable rule: if someone is hurting and no one else notices, it becomes your job to see. Pauline took the lesson to heart. At 6 she bandaged a neighbor's kitten with strips from her own t-shirt. At 7 she sat with the kindergartner who wet himself until the tears stopped. She noticed things: a flicker of pain, a too quick smile, the way people turned away when they thought no one watched. The first day of 2nd grade brought the 2 girls into the same orbit. Wilma arrived in the classroom escorted by an aide, her yellow backpack almost as big as she was. She kept her eyes down, hands folded tight. The teacher introduced her with practiced kindness, explaining that Wilma used sign language and asking the class to be patient. Most children stared, then returned to their chatter. Pauline stared longer. She saw the small flinch when someone laughed too loudly. She saw Wilma rub her left ear 3 separate times before the morning bell. Recess offered the first real crossing. Wilma sat alone on the lowest step, tracing patterns in the dust with one finger. Pauline approached slowly, the way her mother had taught her with frightened animals. She crouched, offered a gentle wave, then pointed to her own ear and tilted her head. "Does it hurt?" Wilma hesitated, then gave the tiniest nod. Pauline's heart cracked open right there on the sun-warmed concrete. From that day forward Pauline became a quiet shadow at Wilma's side. She learned the basic signs the teacher used. She invented her own when words failed: 2 fingers walking across her palm to ask if Wilma wanted to swing, a hand over her heart to say "you're safe with me." Adults praised her sweetness and moved on, never noticing the deeper current. Pauline was collecting clues. The way Wilma's shoulders curled inward when certain caregivers arrived. The red marks sometimes visible above the hearing device. The tears quickly blinked away when no one was supposed to be looking. No one else connected the fragments. Doctors saw scans and declared everything within expected parameters. Laura saw schedules and believed love could be measured in appointments booked. The nannies saw a difficult child and protected their own peace. Only Pauline, 7 years old and armed with nothing but open eyes, began to sense that the silence surrounding Wilma was heavier than deafness alone. If you're feeling the weight of this little girl's hidden pain the way I am, do me a favor right now, pause for just 3 seconds and hit that like button. Every like helps this story reach another heart that needs to remember how much quiet suffering hides behind perfect smiles. And drop a quick comment: "I'm here for Wilma," or simply tell me where you're watching from tonight. I read them all, and they remind me we're not alone in these stories. Because what Pauline started to understand that September, what the adults missed for 7 long years, was only the beginning of the unraveling. The sun was melting into the hills of Burbank, spilling honey-colored light across the wide tree-lined street. Jacaranda petals drifted like purple snow, catching the glow and drifting down onto the warm concrete. Everything felt slow, almost drowsy, the kind of late afternoon hush that makes the world feel safe. Wilma sat on the curb in her favorite yellow sundress, the fabric bright as fresh butter against the sidewalk. One small hand kept drifting to her left ear, rubbing in slow, tired circles. The ache had been worse all day, a hot pulse that throbbed behind the silver curve of the hearing device. She didn't cry anymore. She had learned long ago that tears changed nothing. She simply waited for the pain to ease, the way she waited for everything else. Pauline walked beside her in comfortable silence, blue sneakers, scuffed sneakers matching the rhythm of Wilma's quieter steps. She had noticed the rubbing again, the tiny flinch every few seconds. Something inside Pauline tightened. She stopped walking. Wilma looked up, confused. Pauline knelt, knees pressing into the sun-warmed pavement, and gently turned Wilma's face toward the light. The golden hour painted both girls in soft fire. Pauline brushed Wilma's curls aside with the care of someone handling something breakable. Her brown eyes narrowed, focused, serious beyond her 7 years. There, half hidden beneath the edge of the hearing device, something glinted. Not the clean shine of medical-grade plastic or silicone. This was darker, sharper, wrong. A thin metallic shard, no longer than a fingernail, wedged deep where skin met device. It had been pressed there so long the flesh around it had grown slightly swollen, angry red. Pauline's breath caught. Why does this hurt her? Why has no one ever looked right here? Her small fingers moved without permission, guided by certainty rather than fear. She pinched the edge of the shard between thumb and forefinger, steady, gentle, the way her father had taught her to pull a splinter from her own palm. Wilma tensed, eyes wide, but she didn't pull away. Trust lived in the space between them now. Across the street, inside the glass and steel house, Laura Peterson glanced out the tall window while ending a conference call. She saw the girls on the curb, saw Pauline kneeling, saw the sudden stillness. Something in the posture of both children, one frozen, one reaching, slammed into her chest like warning bells. She dropped the phone mid-sentence and ran. Heels struck marble, then concrete. The front door flew open. Laura sprinted across the perfect lawn, panic rising in her throat. The distance felt endless. On the sidewalk, Pauline pulled by a force older than medicine. Pauline drew the shard free. It slid out with a soft, sickening release. The world rushed in. A car hummed past. A breeze rattled palm fronds overhead. A sparrow called from the jacaranda. Pauline's own breath trembled beside Wilma's cheek. Wilma's mouth opened in a perfect, shocked O. Her hands flew to her ears as if to hold the sounds inside before they escaped. Eyes huge, she stared at Pauline, at the sky, at everything at once. Then she did the impossible. She shouted. A raw, startled, beautiful sound burst from her throat, half laugh, half cry, the very first noise she had ever chosen to make. Laura reached them just as the shout left Wilma's lips. Her legs gave out. She collapsed to her knees on the sidewalk, skirt pooling around her like spilled ink, tears already streaming. Wilma? Her voice cracked open, desperate, disbelieving. Did you just hear me? Wilma turned toward the sound of her mother's voice, face glowing with terror and wonder. Pauline still knelt, the thin metallic shard pinched between her fingers, catching the last rays of sun like a tiny evil star. The air itself seemed to hold its breath. Because that shard was never part of any hearing device. It was never meant to help. And in the stillness that followed Wilma's very first shout, every secret that had hidden in silence for 7 years began to scream. Family, if your heart is pounding the way mine is right now, do not move. Hit that like button so this moment reaches every parent, every child, every person who has ever felt unseen. Drop I'm crying, or your city in the comments. I need to know I'm not alone feeling this. And if you're new here, subscribe and turn on the bell, because what happens in the next 60 seconds of this story will shake you to your core. We're only just beginning to understand what was really done to this little girl, and who did it. The world had become a monster with 1,000 mouths, and every single one was screaming. Wilma pressed her palms against her ears, but the sounds pushed through anyway. The rustle of leaves overhead roared like crashing waves. A passing car growled like a beast she had never known existed. Even the wind, soft and warm against her skin, carried whispers that clawed at her fragile mind. For 7 years she had floated in perfect stillness. Now the universe was pouring itself into her skull all at once, and she had no idea how to hold it. Her small body trembled. Tears spilled down her cheeks, not from sadness but from sheer overwhelm. She reached blindly, desperately, and her fingers found Pauline's arm. She gripped it like a lifeline thrown into churning water. Pauline did not pull away. She wrapped both arms around Wilma and held tight, her own heart hammering, her voice a gentle hum that Wilma could now miraculously hear. Laura crawled the last few feet across the sidewalk, knees scraping concrete, mascara carving black rivers down her face. She reached for her daughter, hands shaking, mouth forming words that came out broken and jagged. Wilma flinched at the volume, at the unfamiliar texture of her mother's voice. Laura pulled back as if struck, realizing in one devastating instant that her own child did not recognize the sound of her. Guilt landed like a sledgehammer. Every missed dinner. Every phone call taken during bedtime. Every report she signed without reading. Every nanny she trusted without watching. The memories crashed over Laura in a relentless tide, each one heavier than the last. She had believed she was saving her daughter by spending millions on specialists. She had never once stopped long enough to simply look. And now a 7-year-old girl with no medical training had done what the world's finest doctors could not. Laura's hands fumbled for her phone. She dialed with fingers that refused to steady. Ambulance first. Then her personal physician. Then the head of audiology at the private clinic that bore Wilma's name. Then the school principal. Then the chief of pediatrics at Cedars-Sinai. Words tumbled out of her in fractured bursts. Something in her ear. She heard me. She actually heard me. I don't understand. Please come now. Within 20 minutes, the quiet suburb transformed into controlled chaos. Paramedics knelt on the sidewalk, shining lights into Wilma's ears while she clung to Pauline and refused to let go. Neighbors gathered on porches, murmuring questions no one could answer. Laura paced behind the ambulance doors, phone still pressed to her ear, voice raw from repeating the same impossible sentences. Pauline's mother arrived just as the stretcher slid into the vehicle. She wrapped her daughter in a fierce embrace, eyes wide with confusion and fear, but Pauline only pointed toward Wilma. The message was clear: she needs me. After a hurried exchange with Laura, both Lamberts climbed into the ambulance. No one had the heart to separate the girls now. The hospital swallowed them whole. Fluorescent lights buzzed overhead, a sound Wilma had never known existed. Machines beeped in rhythms that made her cover her ears again and again. Nurses spoke in hushed tones that still felt like shouts. Every new noise carved another groove of terror into her young mind. She cried silently, exhausted, until Pauline began to hum a slow, simple melody. The tune cut through the chaos like a single candle in a dark room. Wilma's grip loosened just enough for the doctors to begin their work. They ran every test the modern world could offer. MRI scans mapped the intricate architecture of her inner ear in glowing cross-sections. Audiology panels measured responses to frequencies ranging from the deepest bass to the highest whistle. Neurologists examined nerve pathways. Radiologists scrutinized bone density around the cochlea. For hours the machines hummed and clicked while Wilma lay still, Pauline's hand never leaving hers, Laura watching through glass with hollow red-rimmed eyes. When the results finally arrived, the lead audiologist asked everyone except essential staff to leave the room. Laura refused. She planted herself in the corner like a statue, daring anyone to move her. The doctor spoke slowly, carefully, as if each word might shatter something. Wilma's auditory system was intact. Her cochlea was healthy. Her nerve pathways were pristine. Her brain processed sound exactly as it should. There was no congenital defect. No neurological damage. No genetic anomaly. Wilma's hearing had been perfect from the day she was born. Laura's knees buckled. A nurse caught her before she hit the floor. The doctor held up a small evidence bag. Inside lay the thin metallic shard Pauline had pulled from Wilma's ear, now cleaned and examined under laboratory lights. It was not medical equipment. It was not a fragment of any known hearing device. It had been hand-shaped, deliberately sharpened, and positioned with terrible precision to block the ear canal and press against the eardrum without puncturing it. Someone had designed this object to steal sound without leaving obvious damage. Someone had placed it inside a newborn's ear and left it there for 7 years. The room fell into a silence heavier than any Wilma had ever known. The doctor looked at Laura, then at the team, then back at the evidence bag. His voice dropped to barely a whisper. "Mrs. Peterson, who had access to your daughter as an infant?" Laura opened her mouth, But no sound came. Because the list was long. And the betrayal hiding inside it was about to break her completely. Family, if this chapter left you breathless, you are exactly where you need to be. Hit that like button right now and let the algorithm know this story deserves to be seen. Drop a comment, "Justice for Wilma," or tell me how you're feeling. I read every single one. Share this with someone who needs to remember that truth always finds its way to the surface. And if you haven't subscribed yet, now is the moment. Turn on that notification bell so you don't miss what comes next. Because the hunt for the person who stole 7 years of Wilma's life starts now. The hospital room had emptied of machines and nurses, but a new kind of tension filled the space they left behind. Detectives arrived before midnight, their badges glinting under fluorescent lights, their faces carved with the grim focus of people who had seen terrible things and suspected they were about to see another. Laura sat in a hard plastic chair, her designer blouse wrinkled, her eyes swollen to slits. Across from her, a detective with silver-streaked hair placed a notepad on the table and asked the question that would unravel everything. Who had access to Wilma in her first weeks of life? The list began to pour out of Laura like a confession. There was Margaret, the nanny. She had been with the family the longest, hired 2 weeks before Wilma's birth to help with the transition. Margaret was efficient, experienced, and came with glowing references from 3 other wealthy families. She had been the one to hold Wilma during those sleepless early nights when Laura was recovering from a difficult delivery. She had been the one to change diapers, prepare bottles, and rock the baby to sleep while Laura returned to work far too soon. Margaret had access to everything. Margaret had been trusted with everything. Then there was the night nurse, a quiet woman named Diane who worked the graveyard shift for the first 4 months. She came recommended by the hospital itself, a professional with decades of experience in newborn care. Diane monitored Wilma through the fragile hours between midnight and dawn, the hours when no one else was watching. She left the position abruptly, citing personal reasons, and Laura had never thought to question why. The speech therapist came next in Laura's memory. Dr. Ellis had been brought in early, before Wilma even turned 1, to begin interventions for her supposed deafness. He visited the house twice a week, working with Wilma in a private room while caregivers waited outside. His sessions were unsupervised. His methods were unconventional. He had stopped returning calls 6 months ago, and Laura had simply hired a replacement without investigation. Then there was the disgruntled relative. Laura's own sister, Caroline, had severed ties with the family years ago after a bitter dispute over their late father's estate. Caroline had visited exactly once after Wilma's birth, staying for 3 days, her smile too tight, her congratulations too sharp. She had held the baby. She had been alone with the baby. And she had left without saying goodbye. Finally, there was the former employee. A young assistant named David who had worked in Laura's home office during her maternity leave. He handled scheduling, correspondence, and household logistics. He had been fired after Laura discovered he was leaking confidential company information to a competitor. His termination had been ugly. Threats were made. Lawyers were involved. David had access to every room in the house, including the nursery. 5 people. 5 potential monsters hiding behind ordinary faces. 5 suspects who could have pressed that tiny shard into a newborn's ear and walked away knowing they had stolen her entire world. The detectives wrote every name in silence, their pens scratching like whispers of accusation. But the true horror was still coming. Family, if you're holding your breath right now, you're not alone. Before we go further, hit that like button. Every like pushes this story to someone who needs to hear it. Drop a comment telling me who you suspect. I want to know your theories. And if you haven't subscribed yet, do it now and turn on that bell. Trust me, you don't want to miss what the forensic team is about to reveal. 48 hours later, the forensic report arrived. The metallic shard had been transported to a state crime lab, where technicians examined it under microscopes powerful enough to reveal the secrets of atoms. What they found turned suspicion into certainty and certainty into horror. The object was not medical. It bore no manufacturer's stamp, no serial number from any known company, no trace of the sterile precision that marked legitimate devices. Instead, it showed the unmistakable signs of handcrafting. Someone had shaped it manually, filing down edges, curving the surface to match the contour of an infant's ear canal. The craftsmanship was careful, deliberate, patient. This was not an accident. This was not a malfunction. This was art made for cruelty. But there was more. Scratched into the surface, so faint that only the most powerful magnification could detect them, were tiny serial markings. Letters and numbers etched by hand, perhaps as a signature, perhaps as a record. The technicians could not yet decode their meaning, but they confirmed one thing beyond doubt: whoever made this object wanted to remember it, wanted to mark it as their own. The shard had been positioned with surgical precision to block sound conduction without causing visible damage. It pressed against the eardrum just enough to deaden vibration, just enough to simulate profound deafness, but not enough to rupture or scar. A doctor performing a standard examination would never see it. A specialist focused on internal imaging would overlook the external obstruction. It was hidden in plain sight, a perfect crime committed against a child who could not speak to report her own pain. The lead audiologist requested a meeting with Laura the following morning. She arrived looking like a ghost of the woman who once commanded boardrooms. He sat her down gently, the way one handles something already broken, and delivered the words that would haunt her forever. Wilma was never deaf. Her daughter had spent 7 years trapped in artificial silence. 7 years of isolation, frustration, and unspoken agony. 7 years of therapies that could never work because there was nothing wrong with her ears. 7 years stolen by someone Laura had trusted enough to let into her home. Laura did not scream. She did not cry. She simply folded. Her body collapsed inward like a building whose foundation had finally crumbled. She slid from the chair to the cold hospital floor, her hands pressing against her face, her breath coming in ragged, broken gasps. Guilt wrapped around her like a burial shroud. She had failed. She had missed it. She had poured millions into experts while the answer hid behind her daughter's ear, placed there by a monster she had welcomed through her own front door. The detective stood in the doorway, watching, waiting. Because now the hunt would begin. And somewhere out there, the person who stole Wilma's voice was about to learn that silence never lasts forever. The investigation moved faster than anyone expected. Detectives worked through the night, cross-referencing timelines, pulling employment records, and conducting interviews that stretched into the early hours. Each suspect was summoned, questioned, and measured against the evidence. The night nurse had an alibi confirmed by hospital security footage from her second job during the critical window. The speech therapist's first visit occurred months after Wilma's supposed deafness was diagnosed. The disgruntled sister had been out of the country during the first weeks of Wilma's life, her passport stamps verified by customs records. The fired employee had never been alone with a baby, his access limited to the home office on the opposite side of the estate. One by one, the suspects fell away. One remained. Margaret. The woman who had been there from the beginning. The woman who held Wilma before Laura's stitches had healed. The woman who had more access, more opportunity, and more unsupervised hours than anyone else in that household. The woman Laura had trusted with her daughter's life. Detectives obtained a warrant for Margaret's apartment on the third day. What they found there erased any remaining doubt. Hidden in a shoebox at the back of her closet, beneath old photographs and expired coupons, lay a small collection of tools. Miniature files. Jeweler's pliers. A magnifying glass mounted on a stand. And tucked into a velvet pouch, 3 more metallic shards identical to the one Pauline had pulled from Wilma's ear. Spares. Replacements. Evidence of planning that stretched back years. Beside the tools, they found a journal. The pages were filled with Margaret's handwriting, neat and careful, documenting dates and observations. She had recorded Wilma's responses to sound tests, noting with clinical detachment each time the child failed to react. She had written about Laura's desperation, the endless parade of specialists, the mounting frustration that drove the CEO to work longer hours and spend less time at home. She had chronicled her own growing importance in the household, her indispensability, her power. The final entry, dated just weeks before Pauline's discovery, contained a sentence that made the lead detective set down the journal and step outside for air. She needs me. She will always need me. I made sure of it. Margaret was arrested at 6 a.m, pulled from her bed in handcuffs while her neighbors watched through cracked blinds. She did not resist. She did not cry. She walked to the patrol car with her chin raised, her expression unreadable, as if she had been expecting this moment for a very long time. The interrogation room was small, gray, and merciless. Margaret sat on one side of a metal table, detectives on the other. A camera recorded every breath, every blink, every flicker of emotion that crossed her weathered face. For 2 hours she said nothing, her lips pressed into a thin line, her eyes fixed on a spot somewhere beyond the walls. Then, without warning, she began to speak. Family, what you are about to hear is the confession that shattered everything. If this story has gripped your heart, hit that like button right now. Do not scroll past without letting the algorithm know this moment matters. Drop a comment, tell me how you're feeling, tell me you're still here. And if you haven't subscribed yet, this is your sign. Click that button, turn on the bell, and stay with me through the darkness. Because the truth Margaret revealed will haunt you long after this chapter ends. She had worked for wealthy families her entire adult life. 30 years of cooking meals she could not afford, cleaning homes she would never own, raising children who would grow up to forget her name. She had watched employers build empires while she counted pennies. She had smiled through holidays spent serving others, through birthdays no one remembered, through decades of invisibility. Then Laura Peterson hired her. Laura, who was younger, richer, and more powerful than anyone Margaret had ever served. Laura, who spoke on the phone in languages Margaret did not understand, who flew on private jets to cities Margaret would never see, who had everything and still complained about exhaustion. Laura, who handed her newborn daughter to the help and returned to conquering the world. Resentment had taken root slowly, quietly, like mold growing behind perfect walls. Margaret told herself she deserved more. She told herself Laura did not appreciate what she had. She told herself the baby would be better off needing her, relying on her, bonded to her in a way that could never be broken. The idea came during a sleepless night in the nursery. Wilma was only 3 weeks old, small and fragile and completely dependent. Margaret had studied enough about hearing aids and ear anatomy from the specialists already circling the household. She knew where to place something. She knew how to make it invisible. She knew no one would ever think to look. She crafted the shard herself, working late at night in her apartment, filing and shaping until it fit perfectly. She inserted it while Wilma slept, her tiny body still and trusting. The baby stirred, whimpered once, then settled. Margaret told herself she was not hurting the child. She was simply securing her own future. She was making herself essential. She was guaranteeing that no matter how many specialists came and went, no matter how much money Laura threw at the problem, Wilma would always need Margaret. She had been right. For 7 years, she had been the constant. The caregiver who understood Wilma best. The one who could calm her tantrums, interpret her signs, manage her silence. Laura depended on her completely. The job was safe. The paychecks kept coming. And Margaret finally mattered. She never expected a 7-year-old girl with no training to see what the experts missed. The confession ended in silence. Detectives exchanged glances heavy with disgust. A prosecutor watching through the one-way glass pressed a hand to her mouth. Somewhere down the hall, a phone began to ring. Laura was brought to a private room to hear the recording. She listened with her hands gripping the armrests, her knuckles white, her breath shallow. When Margaret's voice described inserting the shard into her newborn daughter's ear, Laura broke. The scream that tore from her throat echoed through the corridor. It was primal, gutted, the sound of a mother realizing she had entrusted her child to a monster. She collapsed against the table, sobbing with her entire body, crying for the 7 years she could never return, for the pain she never saw, for the silence she had believed was fate when it had been sabotage all along. No one tried to comfort her. Some wounds do not accept comfort. They only demand justice. And justice, at last, was coming. The world had cracked open, and Wilma was learning to live in its pieces. In the days following Margaret's arrest, the Peterson estate transformed into something between a recovery ward and a sanctuary. Specialists still came and went, but their purpose had shifted. They were no longer searching for what was wrong. They were helping Wilma understand what had always been right. Her ears worked. Her brain processed sound flawlessly. But 7 years of silence had left gaps that no surgery could fill. She needed someone to walk her through the noise, to translate the chaos into meaning. That someone was Pauline. The two girls became inseparable. Laura, still shattered and barely functional, did not question it. She simply watched from doorways as Pauline took Wilma's hand each morning and led her through a world reborn in sound. The Lambert family had essentially moved into the guest wing, Pauline's mother insisting they stay close until things stabilized. No one argued. No one had the strength. Pauline approached her task with the seriousness of a surgeon and the gentleness of a poet. She started with the simplest sounds, the ones Wilma encountered every day but had never known. The refrigerator's hum became a lesson. Pauline pressed Wilma's palm against the cool metal door, letting her feel the vibration while the sound filled her ears. She pointed, made a simple sign, and waited until recognition flickered in Wilma's eyes. The refrigerator hums. It means cold. It means food is safe inside. They moved through the house like explorers mapping new territory. The click of light switches. The rush of water from faucets. The soft thud of cabinet doors closing. The sharp ring of the doorbell that made Wilma jump every single time. Pauline never laughed at her fear. She simply held her hand tighter and repeated the lesson until the fear became familiarity. Outside, the education continued. Birds were not just flutters of color anymore. They were songs, each species carrying its own melody. Pauline would point to a sparrow on the fence, then cup her hands around her mouth and whistle a poor imitation of its call. Wilma would listen, eyes wide, then attempt her own version. The sounds that came out were clumsy, unpracticed, beautiful. Each one was a victory over 7 stolen years. Cars taught rhythm. Pauline had Wilma stand on the porch, eyes closed, counting the seconds between engine sounds. She learned that the garbage truck rumbled low and slow on Tuesday mornings. She learned that the mail carrier's van had a squeak in its brakes. She learned that the world had been speaking to her all along, and now, finally, she could hear its voice. But more than sounds, Pauline taught Wilma something no specialist could measure. She taught her that she was not broken. She taught her that the silence had never been her fault. She sat with Wilma during the nightmares that came without warning, when the little girl woke screaming at sounds that invaded her dreams. She held her until the trembling stopped. She hummed the same simple melody she had used in the hospital, the one that cut through chaos like light through fog. Their friendship became the foundation upon which Wilma's new life was built. Family, if you are feeling the weight of this healing, you are exactly where you need to be. Pause right now and hit that like button. Every like tells the algorithm that stories of friendship and recovery deserve to be seen. Drop a comment sharing a time when someone anchored you through your own storm. And if you have not subscribed yet, join this family now. We are building something beautiful here, one chapter at a time. While the girls navigated their world of sound, 2 mothers sat in Laura's kitchen and navigated something equally difficult. Grace Lambert was nothing like Laura Peterson. She did not own designer clothes or multiple properties. She had never spoken to a board of directors or seen her name in a magazine. She was a middle school teacher who drove a 10-year-old sedan and considered a family vacation to be a weekend at the beach 2 hours away. Her wealth was measured in laughter around the dinner table, in a husband who still held her hand after 15 years, in a daughter who noticed the pain of others because her parents had taught her to look. Laura sat across from her, stripped of every armor she had ever worn. No makeup. No tailored suit. No commanding presence. Just a mother drowning in guilt, desperate for someone to throw her a rope. Grace did not offer platitudes. She did not say everything happens for a reason or you did your best. She simply listened. She let Laura pour out the years of missed moments, the conferences prioritized over bedtimes, the reports trusted instead of instincts. She let the confession flow without interruption, without judgment, without the flinch of someone who had never made mistakes of her own. When Laura finally fell silent, Grace reached across the table and covered her hand. 2 women from different worlds, connected by daughters who had found each other on a sunlit sidewalk. One had money and nothing else. One had little money and everything that mattered. In that kitchen, they began to teach each other. Laura learned that presence was more valuable than provision. Grace learned that wealth could be its own kind of prison. They did not become instant friends. They became something deeper. They became allies in the work of healing. But it was Pauline who delivered the moment that no one expected. One evening, as the sun dipped low and painted the living room in amber light, Wilma signed a question to her friend. She asked how Pauline had known to look behind her ear when no doctor ever had. Pauline was quiet for a long moment. Then she answered in simple signs, her face serious, her eyes holding something ancient and knowing. She explained that she had always felt it. From the very first day at school, she had sensed that Wilma's silence was not natural. It pressed against her like a weight she could not name. She did not hear Wilma's pain. She felt it, the way some people feel storms coming before the clouds appear. She had not understood what it meant. She only knew that something was wrong, something hidden, something waiting to be found. Wilma stared at her friend, tears slipping silently down her cheeks. Pauline had not just saved her hearing. She had seen her when no one else could. And that kind of sight was rarer than any fortune Laura Peterson had ever built. The courthouse hallway stretched long and cold, its marble floors echoing with footsteps that seemed to carry the weight of judgment itself. Wilma walked between her mother and Pauline, her small hand gripping her friend's fingers so tightly that both their knuckles had turned white. She had dressed herself that morning for the first time, choosing a simple blue dress that Pauline had said matched her eyes. She wanted to look brave. She did not feel brave. The room where Margaret waited was not a courtroom. It was a conference space arranged for what the lawyers called a victim impact meeting. The prosecution had offered Wilma the chance to face the woman who had stolen her childhood before the formal trial began. Laura had refused initially, desperate to shield her daughter from any more pain. But Wilma had insisted, communicating through signs and the new, halting words she was learning to speak. She needed to see Margaret. She needed to say something. She could not explain what or why. She only knew it had to happen. Detectives lined the walls like statues in uniform. A prosecutor sat at one end of the long table, her files arranged in neat stacks she no longer needed to reference. A court-appointed psychologist stood near the door, ready to intervene if the encounter proved too traumatic. Everyone had prepared for tears, for shouting, for the raw explosion of a child confronting her abuser. No one had prepared for what actually happened. Margaret sat at the opposite end of the table, her wrists resting on the surface, her orange jumpsuit a stark contrast against the polished wood. She had aged decades in the weeks since her arrest. Her hair, once neatly pinned, hung limp and gray around her face. Her eyes, once sharp with hidden calculation, now held nothing but hollow exhaustion. She did not look like a monster. She looked like a broken woman who had finally stopped running from herself. Laura entered first, her legs unsteady, her breath coming in shallow gasps. She had imagined this moment 1,000 times, rehearsed the words she would hurl like weapons, the accusations she would carve into Margaret's soul. But now, standing in the same room as the woman who had betrayed her so completely, she found herself unable to speak. Her throat closed around her fury, trapping it somewhere beneath her ribs. Pauline guided Wilma to a chair but did not sit herself. She stood behind her friend like a guardian, one hand resting on Wilma's shoulder, her presence a steady warmth against the room's cold formality. The psychologist nodded, signaling that Wilma could begin whenever she was ready. For a long moment, no one moved. The silence pressed against the walls, heavy and suffocating. A detective shifted his weight. The prosecutor uncapped a pen, then capped it again. Margaret stared at the table, unable or unwilling to lift her gaze to the child she had wronged. Then Wilma stood. Family, what happens next is the moment that will stay with you long after this story ends. If you have felt every ounce of this journey, hit that like button right now. Do not let this moment pass without telling the algorithm that stories of courage and grace deserve to be witnessed. Drop a comment with a single word describing what you feel. Share this with someone who needs to believe that forgiveness is possible even in the darkest places. And if you are not yet subscribed, join this family before the next words leave Wilma's hands. She crossed the distance between her chair and Margaret's end of the table with steps that seemed too steady for a 7-year-old. Laura reached out to stop her, but something in her daughter's posture made her pull back. This was not fear driving Wilma forward. This was something else entirely. Wilma stopped directly in front of Margaret. For the first time since the meeting began, the former nanny raised her eyes. What she saw in the child's face made her flinch as if struck. There was no hatred there. No accusation. No demand for suffering. There was only sorrow. And underneath it, something that looked impossibly like compassion. Wilma lifted her hands and began to sign. The movements were slow, deliberate, shaped with the careful precision Pauline had taught her. Everyone in the room watched, most not understanding the language, but all understanding that something sacred was unfolding. The prosecutor, who had studied basic signs in preparation for the case, translated in a whisper that carried through the silence. You were sad. I forgive you. Margaret's face crumpled. The collapse was total, immediate, devastating. A sound escaped her throat that was not quite a sob and not quite a scream but something torn from a place deeper than either. She folded forward onto the table, her shoulders heaving, her hands clawing at the wood as if trying to hold onto something that had already slipped away. 7 years of justification, of telling herself she had done nothing truly wrong, shattered against 5 simple words from the child she had silenced. Laura broke next. She sank into the nearest chair, tears streaming down her face, her hand pressed over her mouth to muffle the sounds escaping against her will. The prosecutor blinked rapidly, her professional composure cracking. The psychologist removed her glasses and wiped her eyes with the back of her hand. And the detectives, those hardened men and women who had witnessed humanity's worst and trained themselves to feel nothing, stood against the walls with wet cheeks and trembling jaws. Wilma remained still, watching Margaret cry, her expression holding no triumph, only release. When the officers finally stepped forward to formalize the arrest, Margaret did not resist. She rose on unsteady legs, her face swollen and streaked, her eyes never leaving Wilma's. The metal handcuffs clicked into place with a sound that rang through the room like a bell. Wilma heard it. The sharp, cold snap of justice closing around guilty wrists. It was a new sound, one Pauline had never taught her. But she understood its meaning instantly. It meant consequences. It meant protection. It meant that the woman who had stolen her voice would never steal another child's. Pauline moved to Wilma's side and took her hand again. They stood together, 2 small figures framed against the weight of an adult world, watching as Margaret was led toward the door. Just before she disappeared into the corridor, Margaret turned one last time. Her eyes found Wilma's across the distance. And she mouthed 2 words that no one else saw. "Thank you." The door closed behind her. And Wilma, still holding Pauline's hand, took her first breath as a truly free child. 1 year later, the Peterson estate no longer echoed with silence. Music drifted through hallways that had once absorbed only footsteps and whispered instructions. Laughter bounced off walls that had witnessed years of clinical appointments and frustrated sighs. The glass and steel structure remained the same, but the life inside it had transformed into something unrecognizable from the cold efficiency that had defined it before. Wilma's hearing lessons continued 3 times a week, but they had evolved beyond clinical exercises. Her audiologist had become more of a music teacher, introducing her to symphonies and folk songs, to the crash of drums and the whisper of violins. Wilma discovered that she loved the piano. The way each key produced a distinct tone fascinated her endlessly. She would sit at the grand piano in the living room for hours, pressing keys one at a time, memorizing the relationship between touch and sound. Her progress astonished everyone. Within months, she was playing simple melodies. Within a year, she was composing her own. The emotional healing came slower, wrapped in layers that only time could peel away. Nightmares still visited occasionally, pulling her from sleep with phantom sensations of pressure behind her ear. But they grew less frequent, less intense, less powerful. A therapist specializing in childhood trauma visited weekly, guiding Wilma through exercises that helped her brain understand that the silence was gone forever. She learned to trust that sounds would still be there when she woke. She learned that her ears belonged to her now, that no one would ever take them again. The pain that had throbbed behind her left ear for 7 years became a distant memory. Sometimes Wilma would touch the spot where the shard had been, marveling at how ordinary it felt. Just skin. Just the curve of her ear. No hidden torment waiting beneath the surface. The absence of pain became its own kind of joy, a constant reminder that she had survived something designed to break her. Her childhood, so long suspended in isolation, finally began in earnest. She joined a soccer team and discovered the thrill of teammates shouting her name across the field. She attended birthday parties and learned that the sound of children singing was one of the most beautiful noises in the world. She made friends who knew nothing of her past, who saw only a bright-eyed girl with a contagious smile and an unusual appreciation for sounds others took for granted. She was 8 years old, and for the first time, she was living like it. Laura's transformation ran even deeper. The woman who had once measured her worth in quarterly earnings and global influence found herself redefining success entirely. She cut her work hours in half, then cut them again. Board meetings that once dominated her calendar were delegated to trusted executives. International trips that had stolen weeks at a time were reduced to rare necessities. She had spent years building an empire while her daughter suffered in silence. Now she was determined to build something more important. A home. She learned sign language with a dedication she had once applied to mastering markets. Every evening, she practiced with Wilma, their hands dancing through conversations that words alone could never capture. Even though Wilma could hear now, the signs remained their private language, a bridge between the years of silence and the future they were building together. Laura discovered that communication was never about sound. It was about presence. It was about showing up. It was about staying. The household staff changed entirely. Every caregiver was vetted with exhaustive background checks. Every therapist was supervised. Every room was filled with warmth instead of efficiency. Laura installed no monitoring cameras, no tracking systems. She did not need technology to protect her daughter anymore. She needed only to be there, fully and completely, in a way she had never allowed herself before. Family, if this transformation is filling your heart the way it is filling mine, take a moment right now. Hit that like button and let the world know that redemption is real. Drop a comment sharing what this story has meant to you. And share this video with someone who needs to believe that broken things can become beautiful. We are almost at the end, and I need you here for the final moment. Pauline Lambert received more than gratitude. Laura established a full scholarship in Pauline's name, covering every expense from elementary school through university. The Lambert family, who had never dreamed of such opportunities, watched their daughter's future expand beyond any limitation they had imagined. But Laura did not stop there. She created a mentorship program connecting young people like Pauline with leaders across industries, ensuring that empathy and observation would be valued as highly as ambition and achievement. And in Wilma's name, she founded a non-profit program for children with disabilities, providing resources, advocacy, and support for families who lacked the wealth to fight their battles alone. Pauline accepted it all with the same quiet grace that had defined her from the beginning. She did not boast about the scholarship. She did not treat Wilma differently because of her mother's generosity. She simply continued being what she had always been: a friend, a guide, an anchor in the storm. The final scene of this story returns to where it began. 1 year after the sidewalk revelation, on an afternoon painted in the same golden light, Wilma and Pauline walked the same tree-lined street. Jacaranda petals drifted down like purple whispers. The same birds sang from the same branches. The same breeze rustled through the same leaves. But everything was different. Wilma walked with her head high, her ears open to the symphony of the world. She heard the crunch of gravel beneath their shoes. She heard the distant bark of a neighbor's dog. She heard the hum of a plane crossing the endless California sky. And then Pauline laughed. It was a simple sound, sparked by something small, perhaps a squirrel darting across their path or a memory only the two of them shared. The laugh rang out bright and clear, filling the space between them with pure, unfiltered joy. Wilma stopped walking. She turned to her friend, her face breaking into a smile so wide it seemed to hold every ounce of happiness she had been denied for 7 years. And she laughed with her. Loud. Free. Whole. The sound echoed down the sidewalk where silence had once reigned, a declaration to the universe that Wilma Peterson had found her voice at last. Family, we have reached the end. If this story touched your soul, hit that like button one final time. Subscribe if you have not already, and turn on that notification bell so you never miss another journey. Drop a comment telling me what moment moved you most. Share this with everyone who needs hope today. Because this was never just a story about a girl who could not hear. It was a story about the people who finally listened. And that makes all the difference.